hear it for our choir once again. Today we are celebrating the resurrection. We are celebrating the renewal of life. And the evidence is all around us in the bright colors that we're wearing, in the evidence on the buds on the trees, the flowers that are springing forth. And I think that we are so fortunate to live in the Northwest where we have this explosion of color with all the tulips. Have you been out there lately? If you haven't been out to see the fields of tulips, I don't know if they're up yet, but it is one of the most amazing sights I've ever seen, and we're so blessed that we live near them. So today we are celebrating the resurrection of the Son, both the S-U-N and the S-O-N. We are celebrating the resurrection of life. We're celebrating the resurrection of any dead condition in our lives. So, are you ready to rise up? Yes. Are you ready to rise up and move the stone away? The stone of ignorance, the stone of forgetting. We're rolling away the stone so that we can step into fully the Christed, the Spirit of God beings that we are, having this human experience. I want to share with you some of the scripture from this day, but first we need a little backstory, and that is that last Sunday was Palm Sunday, and it was the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem, and he was fulfilling the prophecies that he was the Messiah. However, he really wasn't the Messiah that they were looking for, because they were looking for someone to save them from the Romans, and they were seeking an earthly kingdom, and his message was about an inner kingdom. So he's riding high on Palm Sunday, and then by Thursday during the Lord's Supper he ends up in the Garden of Gethsemane by himself, and he says to God, if it be so, please pass this cup from me, but if not, thy will be done. And on Thursday night we had a candle lighting communion service where as a community we surrendered to God, we surrendered our will to Spirit. And then on Friday, Jesus was crucified and he was buried. He was crucified on Friday, and the women were preparing his body for burial. And because they were Jewish and because the Sabbath began at sundown, they did not finish preparing his body. So they were showing up at the tomb at dawn on Sunday so that they could finish wrapping his body and putting ointment on it. So we're going to pick up the story from the book of Matthew, chapter 28, verse 1. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. And there was a violent earthquake, for the angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat upon it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. And the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. And then go quickly and tell the disciples he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and they ran to tell the disciples, and suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshiped him. The scriptures in the other books of the Gospels are very similar, except in one, Jesus is unrecognizable to the women. They believe that he is the gardener. And so every year it's fun to look at the whole story and then take different pieces of it that we focus on. So this is the story of resurrection. And the truth is that when we look throughout time and throughout cultures, we see stories of the resurrection, of a descent into darkness, whether it be shamanism or in Egyptian times, in Roman and Greek mythologies. There's a story of Persephone and Demeter, where Demeter is the goddess of fertility, and her daughter is snatched and taken to the underworld. And while she is down there, her mother grieves, and the earth freezes over, which is why we have winter. And then she rises again. When she comes back out, spring returns. So when we look throughout history, when we look through the past, we see this story of the resurrection. We see this story of coming to life. And the truth is, this is a template of our life. This is a template of our life as a spiritual being in a human body. We go along our way, and then things get shaken up. Perhaps we face death squarely in the face, and then we come out of it on the other side, the resurrection, the transformation. Anybody have one in your life over time? Yes. And the truth is, it is the theme of every good book. It is the theme of every good movie. It is the theme of every good life. And it is the theme of the planet Earth, how it is constantly resurrecting from the appearance of death. And I see this story running even through Disneyland. A couple of weeks ago, I was in LA for a seminar, and so I arrived a few days early so that my son and I could go to Disneyland. And what I noticed is that almost every ride is about the story of the resurrection. I was fascinated, and I was there in the off-season. I was fascinated by how many people were waiting in line for these rides. 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, for a ride that lasts 3 to 5 minutes. And then they'd be on the ride, and as soon as they get off, they go run to get in line for the next one. And then you run to get in line for the next one. And I thought, this is very interesting. What is this that is happening? And what I noticed is that each ride was experiential, so that people could live through their own transformation in 5 minutes or less. And then do it again and again and again. It is the American way. We do everything very quickly. Why waste time? Every ride starts out the same. It begins that we're happy and we're having fun and we're just skipping along and everything's just great. And then all of a sudden on the ride it gets really dark and the music changes and it's scary and you hear these voices and you're like, uh-oh, something really bad is going to happen. And sure enough, depending on the ride that you're on, the bottom literally drops out from under you. If you're on Splash Mountain, you go falling. If you're on the Tower of Terror, you drop from the 20th floor straight into the darkness. If you're in Indiana Jones, that ball comes after you and your car goes right under it at the last minute. And then, after you get through the darkness, after you fall into the darkness, then it's happy again. Everything is happy. Splash Mountain, as you are coming after being all wet and having done that great fall, all the little rabbits are singing to you, zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay, my, oh my, what a wonderful day. Isn't that our life? We go along, we're skipping along, and then all of a sudden, uh-oh, it gets a little dark, a little bit scary, don't know what's going to happen, and then boom, we fall, and then we come out the other side, and it's zippity-doo-dah until the next time. I was thinking, when I was looking at the experience of the resurrection, and it probably is somewhat blasphemous, but it would be interesting to have a resurrection ride, an Easter ride, because it fits. It absolutely fits. You could start the ride with Palm Sunday, with Jesus riding into Jerusalem, and Hosanna in the highest, and everybody's happy, and it's wonderful, and then all of a sudden, you have the Lord's Supper, and then he's alone in the Garden of Gethsemane, and you're alone, and you're deserted, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, and then there's the crucifixion and the descent into darkness, and then the stone rolls away, and you rise up, and it's resurrected, and it's life. Be a fun ride, don't you think? It's hallelujah, he is risen. But the piece that I wanted to focus on in the Easter story today is verse 2. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning and his clothes were white as snow. An angel always represents a divine idea or a divine experience that's happening through us. And the tomb is that part of us that is regenerating, doing our inner work. And the stone is being rolled away as that block, that thing that we need to release. I think it's interesting that there's an earthquake that comes and moves the stone, because what I see happening, both globally and personally in people's lives, is that there's like an inner earthquake going on. Does anybody feel it? I mean, things are just so stirred up, and I know we've had all these predictions about 2012. Well, 2012 is here. And 2012 seems to be, to me, a year of change. And I have been in the ministry for about 28 years or so, and I have never in my life witnessed so many people at the same time going through changes. How many of you are going through some kind of major change in your life? Positive or negative, doesn't matter. I see this change, and what I also noticed is I am seeing people meet these changes with grace, with courage, and with humor. I am seeing people step up to some big challenges in ways that I have never witnessed before. So many of us in this room right now have had some kind of a radical change, whether it be the loss of a loved one, perhaps someone you love has died, or perhaps you've received a diagnosis of an illness, or lost a job, or your home. And then, how many of us in this room are having changes that are good and wonderful, but change nevertheless? We're having change, earthquake, shaking up stuff happening, as you all know, on a global level as well. There's a new documentary out, which I have not yet seen, but it is called The Island President. And it is about the islands of Maldives. There are approximately 2,000 small islands. There are 300,000 people on the island of Maldives. And the ocean is rising, and they are in the middle of the ocean. So guess what? When the ocean rises, and there's not any like big hills on these islands, it's very small. So what happens when the ocean rises is their entire country is gone, which is what the documentary is about. They're expecting the Maldives to be underwater in the next couple of decades, which means 300,000 people will have to be evacuated. It is an earthquake, a stirring up of something that is happening, and yet what I see in the former president, Nasheed, there was a coup and he's no longer the president as of February. What I see in him is he is compassionate, he is articulate, he has a sense of humor. He was on the Daily Show earlier this week, and he just shared what was going on with his islands, and he was, and there wasn't guilt, there wasn't anger. It's just like, we're the first. It's happening to us first. And he said, what happens to us today, it's going to happen to you tomorrow. We just happen to be the unlucky ones that are first. And he says, don't be so naive as to think that nature is only trying to hit 300,000 Maldivians. You can live in a different kind of town. If you live in New York, you can go up maybe to the 12th floor of your building. You might be better able to adapt, but it's going to hit everybody. And the documentary filmmaker, John Shank, said, we're just trying to tell a story here. And the story is, what is the effect of what is happening? And it is the fact that some on the front line, like President Nasheed and the Maldivians, are just waking up to the fact that they're first. There are moments in history when people step up and make changes that could lead to a revolution in the world. And we're not so naive as to presume that we're starting a revolution, but we're trying to tell a story that we think is compelling. So this is a big thing. And yet, the way they're presenting it is just wake up, an awareness. Wake up in awareness. And that's the earthquake that moves away the stone. That's the shaking up and the changes that are happening in our individual lives and happening on a global level. There's a reason for the shaking up. It calls something bigger that is within us to come forward. And what is it that's big within us? It's the Spirit of God. It's the Spirit of Christ. It's that God's seed that is seeking to come forth and express itself. There's a story about a man who found the cocoon of a butterfly, and he decided that he was going to sit and watch the butterfly emerge from the cocoon. And he literally sat there for hours and watched this. And there was a little tiny hole in the cocoon, and he could see that the butterfly was trying to struggle its body through that little hole. It was just struggling. And for hours this is going on. And then after all this time, the butterfly just stopped. So the guy's watching this, and he's thinking, well, maybe I should help the butterfly. So he goes and gets some scissors, and he cuts the cocoon off of the butterfly, and he peels it off, and there is a swollen body, and it's got shriveled wings, and he's waiting for it to dry off, so that it can fly away. But it didn't happen. He was waiting for the wings to enlarge, but instead, the butterfly remained fat and with sticky wings that didn't work. And it spent its life crawling around as opposed to flying. So what the man, in his kindness and haste, didn't understand is that the restricting cocoon and the struggle that was required by the butterfly to get through the opening was a way of forcing the fluid from the body into the wings so that it would be ready to fly away. So when you find yourself in a situation of struggle, it isn't because we've done something wrong or we're being punished for it. The truth is, our struggles are a way to become butterflies. Without struggling, it's possible that we can become, if we don't struggle at all, right? If we don't struggle at all, we can be fat and crawling around on the ground all the time. And we never get up and we never fly. And the man who cut off the cocoon, you could call him an enabler in some ways, right? When we enable another person, we don't allow them to work through their own stuff, to create the juice that is needed to wet the wings so they can be strong enough to fly. Now, it doesn't mean to ever, we also help people, of course, but there are times when we have to set boundaries. There are times when we have to say no. There are times when we need to witness the struggling of someone else. I think that as a spiritual community, one of the highest and best things that we can do is we can obviously pray for one another and help when we can, but to witness someone else in their suffering and in their struggle. When we create that sacred space, when I listen and hold that space for you and reflect it back, what we're doing for one another is I'm beholding the Spirit of God in you. And when I behold the Spirit of God in you, I know that you have the answer. I know that answer is inside of you, and I don't need to be cutting away at the cocoon and help you out. I just need to know that the answer is within each one of us. We just need to know that for each other. And that's how we become butterflies and fly. That's how we transform ourselves. We behold the Christ. We behold the Spirit of God so that each person can find the solution themselves so that the Christ can emerge. And that's what the resurrection's about. That's when we call about rising up. That's what we're calling forth. There's a saying that goes, I asked for strength. God gave me difficulties to make me strong. I asked for wisdom. God gave me a problem to solve. I asked for courage, and God gave me obstacles to overcome. I asked for love, and God gave me troubled people to help. Maybe I received nothing I wanted, but I received everything I needed. So if you have been shaken up by an inner earthquake, and you are in the tomb right now, know that when you're in the tomb, that you're making room for what lies next. You are emptying in order to be filled. You are struggling in the chrysalis, and it may not appear to the outside world that you are doing anything, but inside know that you're doing some deep and spiritual work. It gives us the opportunity to draw on our own resources, to have the courage to fly. Jean Houston said, "To resurrect is to allow for the glory of love to have its way with us, to encounter and to surrender to that which is forever seeking us, and from this to conceive the God seed." There was a violent earthquake, for the angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone. Many of us are in the midst of change, but it's a way of receiving an inner call. Change is happening, and what I witness is that we are meeting it, not only personally, but globally. We are meeting it with courage, with grace, and with humor. So rise up, everybody. Rise up, kids. Rise up. We're all on this ride together.